and I love this university. I love art. Just very quickly, because I know many of you are in that process. You have chosen something to study, but maybe you don't see your future that clear. I didn't mind at your age. In fact, I studied chemistry. And I took art, just visiting museums, but I thought, no, I'll do the chemistry. That's what I want to do as a business, as a job, a career. Art will be a hobby. But the arts are so powerful that they took me their way. So from chemistry, I went into the arts more like scientific studies of artworks. I studied in Florence for 1 year, analysis of pigments to see whether it corresponds to the age, X-rays, so understanding the materiality of the artworks. And I worked in museum in Barcelona in the laboratory. Then I moved to Paris. I was at the Louvre, and I was in the scientific laboratory of the Louvre, where I studied many important paintings. I had the Gioconda with me. I even look at the Gioconda with a microscope and other instruments. So an incredible opportunity, because these days, if you go to the Louvre, you are that distance, there is a glass that thick, you don't really can see Leonardo's touch. And from that, I did a master's, I moved more in management, I moved to London, worked at the auction house, Sotheby's, for 22 years, mostly with clients, so I was helping clients buying and selling. And when I moved to the United States for family reasons is when I started teaching and advising and dealing and lecturing and all of that. So having said that, today I'm going to be talking mostly about the art market. It's very complex, and in 1 hour I can only give you like a very, very basic understanding, but if you like it, if you speak Spanish, as Nathan says, I just published one book called Inversión o Pasión, una guía para navegar el mercado del arte, Investment or Passion, a guide to navigate the art market. It's based on a foundational course I've been teaching at the Sotheby's Institute for many years, and you can find it online on Amazon, but there are a few also at Books and Books in Coral Gables, because I did a presentation last year. But there are many other books in English, and there are many ways to find information. So let's start with what we are today. And yes, the title is Why It Is Worth 1 Million. When it's here, you have 400 million, which is for the famous Salvator Mundi attributed to Leonardo da Vinci. And it's very complicated, even for us that are deep in the market, to put financial value to an artwork, because if we talk of value, there are many types of value. Today I'm going to be talking about economic and financial value of the artworks. So I want to start by explaining what is the art market, because some of you may not be familiar. The art market is very different from other markets, but it's the market that deals with artworks. So we're talking about fine arts, so paintings, sculpture, drawing, photography, decorative arts. We talk about furniture, ceramics is decorative arts, and these days auction houses and galleries are also expanding into other categories like jewelry, watches, but even Hermes handbags and sports memorabilia. That's just a way of expanding their brand. Now, this difference is very important. Just as a side, I'm sure all of you have been hearing about the tariffs that the current administration has imposed on many goods. The arts have been affected. Now, very interesting, the fine art, so the tariff works at anything imported into the United States, there is this tariff to pay on it. There is no tariff on fine art, because fine art is covered by the First Amendment of freedom of speech, because art is a way of expressing. The artists express themselves, so for that reason, you cannot have a tariff on it. But on the decorative art, yes, because it's utilitarian. And that's what is causing many troubles for dealers. For example, these days in Miami, there is an important art fair called Art Miami Design. All of that are decorative pieces, but artistic decorative pieces. Now, you have this wonderful, for example, if you know what Lalanne is this French designer. He makes some ships or tables, very decorated, or maybe a Giacometti bronze table. So we consider that a piece of art. But the agent at the border will consider that a table. And on top of it is made of bronze. So you have the double whammy of tariffs. One, because it's a table. Two, because it's metal and tariffs this. So that's what is making life for art dealers very complicated. Because when they fill their import form, they have to justify is an artwork. And that is taking more time and more cost because they need someone specialized who really fill those forms. So this is just to very introduction on the site, but whether it's defined as fine art, decorative arts, has a lot of impact on the market and those working in the market. But the other thing that defines the art market is that each object is unique. So in other markets, if you buy a share of a company, they say a share of Coca-Cola. In one day, there will be thousands of shares of Coca-Cola traded. And you can go to Bloomberg and you can see what's the price. Now, in the art market, every object is unique. Not every painting by Picasso is the same worth, or every artwork. So it's unique. It's not that liquid because there is not like a market that every day you are selling an auction selling Picassos or a gallery selling Picassos. And on top of that, it's very difficult to find what is the value of that specific piece. Okay? So that's why it makes the art market very complicated. Anyone coming from financial markets trying just to apply the knowledge from business to the art market doesn't work. And you may have heard about art funds, which is investment in a fund where instead of what is the investment is on art paintings. There are very few art funds that are kind of successful, are the ones you have people from finance and people from the art market working together. So it's a market that is fantastic, super funny, and great to work in, but very special. So now tell me who drives the art market, who are the main actors in the art market. The core drivers are the auction houses, the galleries, and I put also art fairs and museums. So an art fair, and these days there are many art fairs in Miami, so I will talk a little bit about that. An art fair is nothing else than a concentration of galleries under the same roof. Okay? So it's organized. Usually it's not the galleries themselves that organize art fairs. In some cases it's that, but usually it's an organization that put all the galleries together. Auction houses, there are many auction houses. The top ones are Sotheby's and Christie's, but depending on the value of what you're selling, Sotheby's and Christie's might say, no, we don't deal with that. In general, under 10,000, Sotheby's and Christie's don't sell. Okay, but there are many others, very good ones, that cover that area. Now, at auction, the auction house doesn't own any artwork. They are intermediaries between the seller and the buyer. But the auction house is a business, so they need to get their revenue from somewhere. They get their revenue from a commission from the seller and a commission from the buyer. So when you hear a painting sold for 200 million at Sotheby's last week, Sotheby's doesn't get 200 million. They get a percentage from the seller that can go from 0 to 10%, and in the big numbers is usually 0, and a percentage from the buyers that roughly is around between 25 and 30% of the hammer price. The hammer price is when you see a video and the auctioneer put the hammer down, that's the hammer price. But that's not the final price paid by the buyer. So don't get confused. The hammer price is just the price when the hammer comes down. The buying price, which is what the auction houses disclose on their websites or in the few databases with auction results, is the aggregate price, which is the hammer plus the commission. Okay? So that's very basic, but you understand, yeah? A gallery will sell. If it's a gallery of artists that are already, they can deal in, I have something before. Primary market and secondary market. So primary market is the first time one object is sold. It can come directly from the artist to a collector, through a gallery, or from the artist to the gallery. So that's primary market. Secondary market is any resale. Could be the second, the third, the fourth. And these markets work differently. The primary market, usually the artist gets 50%, and the gallery, if it's a gallery, 50% for the artist, 50% for the gallery. Many people think that's too much, the gallery to get 50%. I tell you, it's not. Maybe they should get 60 or 75%. Because yes, they are selling that, but in order to sell that, they have many costs. They need to pay for the rental for the space, which is a big expense. They need to do all the marketing. They go to art fairs. Going to an art fair is very expensive. A booth at Art Basel starts at 50,000, and the big galleries may spend even 100,000 just on the booth, plus the lighting, plus the shipping, plus the entertainment, plus the hotel and the flights for the people going to work. So it's very expensive going to an art fair. How do they get the revenue to pay for all that marketing or taking in front of the clients these artworks? From that commission. So that's why 50% I think is just fair. In some cases, the very, very big artists, very in demand, some of them may get 60% or 70%, that's very rare, and it's just for top artists. So that's how it works with galleries. The galleries that deal with artwork on secondary market, they just buy that from other collectors at auction, because dealers also buy at auction, and then resell. In that case, it's a resell. If they pay 100 and they are reselling at 120, they get that 20 extra for the revenue. Okay, so that's how it, so if you understand the different model from auctions and galleries. Art fairs, as I mentioned, is this combination. Then museums. Why do I put museums here with market? That you might find that odd. Museums are not the market, they are like a different entity. Yes, they are a different entity, but there is a lot of connection between museums and the market. Much more than many people think, in particular in the contemporary world. Okay? Imagine an artist is still alive and is still creating if their work goes into a museum, and in particular, let's think, goes into the MoMA. MoMA is like the top for contemporary art. That will give a lot of validity to the artist. So any artwork from an artist going into a museum validates, because think, okay, museums know what they're doing, they are very strong academically in the research, so if the museum is showing this or buying this or receives a donation and they accept it, this validates the artist, which in turn will put the price of that artist up, or at least keep it at a certain value. So that's why, and it's important. So museums, on the other hand, these days have less and less money because they don't have funds from the governments or for anything, so they don't have funds. So sometimes they need to accept these loans or these gifts from private collectors. Galleries know, the top galleries, one of the things they do these days more and more is keep this relation or establish new relations with many museums, as long as one of the parts doesn't abuse the other. Okay, so, but that's why I mention museums, because they are not at all independent from the market. And then, so these are the core drivers, but there is a lot of other services working around museums, and you see that this week in Miami. So you have, on one hand, art advisors and appraisers. The difference between advisor and appraiser is the one that put value and is a legal contract. So if you are doing a donation to a museum, for example, the IRS, you need a certificate appraisal for the value of that work. So the IRS will not accept that, say, oh, I'm donating this painting and I say it's worth 100,000, because you're getting a tax rebate from that donation. So the IRS will check that the value you are giving for that painting is the real value. Okay? So any donation has to go through an appraiser, or if there is an inheritance, or for insurance, you need an appraiser. Advisor is just someone that will help a person to buy and sell a collection. Very often, the same person might be an advisor and an appraiser, but not necessarily, and they will work with different hands depending on the situation. This week in Miami, there are many advisors that come with the clients or without their clients, just to see what's on sale, and then they will advise their clients, look, I've seen that painting here or that there, and they do the intermediaries, okay? Because there is so much art, and some of the collectors don't have times, they have businesses, jobs, So the advisor kind of makes like a selection, because they know their clients, they know what they want, what their budget is, which is very important, and then say, look, I found these 3 things. Do you like any of these? I think this is interesting for that or that reason. So that's what the difference between advisor and appraiser. Then there are all the logistics firms. So moving all that art. So you have people that organize the shipping, that creates the crates, that do all the hanging. I was, as Nathan said, Sunday to Art Basel, there was still no painting on the wall. They were not allowed to hang anything until Monday, 7 a.m. They were finishing the walls and the lightings, and on every booth there was like something on the wall saying where the lightings had to go, because some booths wanted all white, or they wanted one of the walls painted in red, or any other thing. So that also moves a lot of people, framers, and so on. Insurance, that's very important, all that has, and there are many other supporting services, but just to say there are many, many jobs around the art market. And of course there are also lawyers that specialize on art. There is all the marketing, the PR forms, and these days a lot of technology also. There is a new section at Art Basel. I hope you all go and visit this weekend, and it's called 010. It's for the first time. There are going to be about, I think, 15 top digital artists or digital projects. So I think that's going to be very exciting. So this is very broad, but these are like the main actors of the art world. Let me talk a little bit about Art Fair, because we are in the Art Miami Week. So I can put like at the top of the pyramid, we have the so-called global branded fairs. Global because they take part in different parts of the world, and they are recognized as the pinnacle of the art fairs. So we have the Art Basels, the Fries, and TEFAF. I'll get back in a moment. So Art Basel is called Basel from the city of Basel in Switzerland, because the first fair was created there in 1970. In 1970, contemporary art was not what it is today. In 1970, what the top collectors were looking for was old masters and 18th century furniture. Okay, so contemporary art was like a niche that very few people were looking at. It's not today, it's like the main collecting category. And then at Art Basel, they decided to expand into the United States. They were looking at different locations, and they end up choosing Miami, also because the city of Miami and a group of top collectors in Miami, including the Rubels, I'm sure you know the museum, the De La Cruzes. Now the museum sadly is no longer there because one of the founders passed away 1 year ago, and they closed and sold the collection, but they were instrumental, and many others from Miami. They kind of convinced the Basel Art Fair that Miami was the right place, and it is, because it's the most important art fair for contemporary art in North America, but in the whole of America. And what Miami has is this nexus of union between North, Central, and South America. And certainly, Art Basel, they want to have like a different flavor in each region. So when you go to Basel, in Basel, which is still considered superior in the sense of what the galleries take there, is very European, much more formal. Whether in Miami, you have a bigger proportion of Latin American galleries, Latin American artists. So they try, and then they open in Hong Kong in 2013. There was already a fair in Hong Kong that they absorbed, and there the flavor is very much Asia. They open in Paris in 2022. Now there is a lot of debate. Is Paris gonna be overpowering Basel? Not yet, but we'll see. Because if any of you have gone to Basel, it's a pretty Swiss town, but very small. There is not much to do. There are very few good hotels or restaurants, which when you compare that to Paris, Paris has much bigger pool, in particular for people coming all the way from the United States. At the same time, in Basel, because it's so small, you are much more focused on the fair itself. Whether when you go to Paris, you have all the distractions of the wonderful museums, the wonderful exhibitions. So, well, we'll see. For now, both are going well together. And then they are opening in Qatar in February. I'm going to be going there, and I'm very much looking forward to see what it is, because the Middle East is an upcoming area for culture. They are dedicating a lot of resources, and it's an interesting part of the world to look at. Now, Frieze is also contemporary art. It was created in London in the, I think, 2007, I don't remember, but the early 2000s. And then they also now have Frieze LA, Los Angeles, and Frieze in Seoul, in Korea. And they just mentioned that they bought the Abu Dhabi Art Fair, and from next year will be called Frieze Abu Dhabi. So these are like the two, where you have Sotheby's and Christie's on the top of the auction houses, and for contemporary art you have Art Basel and Frieze. TEFAF is for contemporary decorative arts. These days they go from, it has all the categories from the antiquity, Roman, Greeks antiquities, all the way to modern. So you have Picasso's, but you may not have a Jeff Koons. And it in Maastricht and is the main one, and then they have one in New York. Then we have like a second tier of international fairs, which are more local, but still very good. And then one concept, these two are intercambiable, but I want you to know the expression satellite fairs. So here in Miami is a very clear example. You have Art Basel, it's like the sun, and you have all the satellites around. Okay? So all the other fairs that are taking place that same week as Art Basel, because they know that Art Basel has a big pool for galleries and collectors. So they want to take advantage of that. And there are many, many fairs. I would say from the point of view of quality and organization, Untitled and Nada. This is Untitled. I love Untitled because it's on the beach. You come to Miami, if you go to the convention center, you can be there for 5-6 hours or more if you want to see every single gallery and artwork, but you have this black ceiling like this, but 5 hours, and you don't know if you're in Miami, you could be in Paris or in Helsinki, because you don't know if it's sunny, raining, whatever. When you're Untitled, they have this tent, and from time to time they have windows, so you see the sea, you feel in Miami, there is natural light, and it's much smaller, so you don't feel overwhelmed. Totally recommend. Nada is also very interesting. I put here Pinta, which is an art fair, which is quite close from here. I disclosed that I also work for them, and I'm giving a talk there on Friday, and specialize only Latin American, also a bit Spanish, Portuguese, but mostly Latin American galleries and artists. And the prices are much more affordable, but it's very interesting to see what's happening in that part of the world, and is in Coconut Grove, so quite close from here. And there are others. Art Miami is also a very good fair. It's very close to the Paris Art Museum. It's the oldest art fair in Miami. It was here well before Art Basel arrived. Okay? And some of the galleries that have been in Miami for many years, usually they're there, and then many others. But that's the concept of satellite fairs. They are not happening in February in Miami. They are happening now because Art Basel. Okay? And then there are other type of local fairs, which is a different competition field, but of course there are many levels of artists and art, so there is a space for everyone. I already mentioned the primary and secondary market, a little bit, I mentioned that, but let's go again. The art market is small in economic size, it's about 70 billions. That sounds very big, but you compare with other companies, let me show you this. Okay, so this is in 2024, what represents the global art market, okay? Sorry, I said 75, 57 billion. That same year, McDonald's was doing 25. So basically by selling, Big Macs, you do as much as by selling many of the paintings in the art world. If you compare with the luxury, the LVMH group, the Louis Vuitton Moët Chandon group, is already bigger. Look at Amazon. Okay, so this is the art market. We think it's very big, but when you put it in perspective with other businesses, it's not that big. Okay, then each artwork is one of a kind, different value, went through that. It's not transparent because we only have results of prices for auctions. Auctions are public, and not only are public and you can go and see what's going on, but there are databases. My favorite one is ArtNet, where you can see all the results from auctions. But you cannot see the results. I mean, galleries don't publish their prices. Neither the asking price nor the sell price. So we don't know what is happening, and galleries represent more than 50% of the market. In fact, we don't know if it represents 40 or 55 or 75 because we don't have data. We have just anecdotal data. But what we know is for sure that at least half of the market, we don't know what's happening. That's why it's very little transparent. And in fact, sometimes there was, Frida Kahlo was sold at Sotheby's auctions in November for 54 million. That was a record for any Latin American artist and for women artists all over. Now, this is a big price. Her previous record was 34 million in 2021. And before that, never got more than 10 million. Now, I was surprised by the estimate, and when I was speaking to people that know about the art freedom market, I said, yes, but in the private market, there have been sales around 80 to 100 million. But of course, I didn't know who was the buyer or the exact painting. But these are things that those that really are dealing with certain artists will know. But that's not published anywhere. So I'm saying 80 to 100, it could be 120, it could be 60, because you really cannot find that data. It's very illiquid because there are not auctions every day, there are not sales every day. They are high cost. Remember, I was talking about the commissions, but you also have, I mean, when you buy a share from a company, you put your money and that's it. If you buy an artwork, you need to make sure it's kept in certain conditions. Miami, with all the humidity, you cannot just have your painting, go on holiday, switch off your air conditioning, because particularly if it's on panel, you might not find it in the same condition when you're back. There is the insurance, conservation, so it's high cost. It doesn't give any dividends. If one day you need to sell for whatever reason, it might be worth more, but it can also be worth much less. So really, art is not a good, it's a very risky financial investment. I never recommend art as a financial investment. Art is a wonderful cultural, emotional investment, and sometimes you can get a financial reward. But buying art just as financial investment is high risk. It's like venture capitalism. Some of you may understand better that. So venture capitalists will maybe invest in 10 companies, and one of them will be a unicorn and will do a lot of money in many years. Maybe another will more or less keep the value, and you will probably lose money in the other 8. That's the same thing if you are investing in art, just a financial investment. So that's why the market is driven by culture, emotion, and reputation, and it's also very difficult to predict future prices because there are not objective data. There is a lot of subjective data that change a lot. This I showed you before. So of all the categories, paintings is still the most demanded category. As you can see, it represents 59%. Then we have sculpture, 50%, works of paper, 11%, prints, multiple, photography, digital art. And of that, today, contemporary art is the most demanded category. Here you have by years from 2014. So this is post-war and contemporary, post-war from the Second World War, so after 1945. Impressionism modern was still holding pretty well. All masters, that was, you remember, it's in 1970, all master was the top category. In 2014, already there was that little, and it's even little here, okay? Impressionism is kind of holding, well, this is 2024 was a very bad year for the market. That's what is lower. This was the COVID crisis. The market slowed down, but didn't stop. And then 21, 22 was a big rebound. People had a lot of money. There were a lot of paintings that had not been traded before. And then the market started going down. 25 keeps going down. It seems that now it's stabilizing. The auctions in New York 2 weeks ago went okay. We'll see what happened this week in Miami. But it seems that it's not going further down. It's not rebounding yet, but hopefully we've got to a plateau. So now let's start with the fun part. I want to show you this tooth painting. This is Jeff Koons, contemporary artist with rabbit. A few years ago, Jeff Koons became the most expensive living artist when this rabbit, which is not that big, is one of these steel sculptures, very shiny, sold for 91 million. And more or less not a year later, Botticelli. Yes, I'm talking of the Renaissance Botticelli, the birth of Venus, and there's so many other paintings in the Uffizi Museum that I'm sure you know who Botticelli is. And it sold for basically the same amount of money. Now, Botticelli is an artist that is in museums. Everyone recognizes its importance in art history, is in top collections, is in top museums. How can a contemporary piece that value? Will it hold? We'll see. There will be a few of the contemporary artists of today that maybe in 50 years they're still holding their value, but it will be just a proportion. Here, just for you to know, this is the top 20 most expensive artworks. Here we have the Salvator Mundi, attributed by to Leonardo da Vinci. I say it attributed because it was sold at Sotheby at Christie's in 2017 for 450 million as a work by Leonardo da Vinci. There are doubts if it's really by Leonardo da Vinci. My personal take on everything I've read is that it may have been painted by Leonardo, and they are part of the artwork, the hair, part of the hands, and that is maybe still the hand of Leonardo, but it has been so heavily restored, it has been so damaged, that there is very little left of the original. However, Leonardo is a big brand. This was bought by someone in the Middle East. It was supposed to be shown at the Louvre Abu Dhabi, but it was even announced it was going to be at the Louvre Abu Dhabi, and then it disappeared. We don't know where it is, so maybe one day it will appear again in one of the museums in the Middle East. We really don't know where it is. We really don't know why it's not being shown, but it was going to be also shown at the exhibition of Leonardo's at the Louvre Museum a couple of years ago. And the Louvre Museum, the scientific laboratory, the same I worked many years ago, had done a big report. I haven't seen it, but I've spoken to people who have seen it, and apparently the Louvre confirms that there are parts of the painting that could be by Leonardo. Of course, no one is 100% sure, but I think the issue is that there are parts that might be original, but that's a small proportion of it. But this one, by Gustav Klimt, that's a record 2 weeks ago at Sotheby's, New York. There are many factors for that, and the interesting thing when you look here at the top artworks, most of them, there are some we can say contemporary, but many are modern or post-impressionist. So really the value these days is still in those paintings that already have a trajectory. They are in museums, they are validated by museums, by top collection, there is good research, there is academic research on them. So those are the artworks that hold the value. And what determines value? When you are valuing an artwork, first you have to identify the work, assess the quality and authenticity, because unfortunately there are a lot of fakes or misattributions in the artwork, and then you have to compare the market data. And the key factors you look as artistic, so authorship, originality, quality, intrinsic to the painting itself, historical provenance and significance, market comparables. That means artworks that are ideally by the same artist. Sometimes that's not possible. An artist of the same style, category, time, and then you have to compare the prices for those. And also, and this is what makes putting value to artwork so difficult, is taste, fashion, because that changes all the time. And there are so many things that can change that from one day to another. Today we are living in the age of social media and celebrities. If one painting or one celebrity goes to a museum and they have a TikTok in front of an artwork, suddenly that artist becomes fashionable. So something like that, that really has to do very little with the historical importance of an artwork, can change taste and can change the market. So value really is complicated because you have to put in this basket this big mix of objective criteria, market conditions, like for example now we are in a depressed market, and the cultural perception of the time. Of all of that, to make it simpler, there are the 10 top factors for value. So I say artist authenticity, condition. So if an artwork is in bad condition, the value goes down. But the condition is not the same if we are talking of a 17th century painting or a contemporary painting. Because if there is a little restoration because there was some paint loss on a 17th century painting, that doesn't impact the value as much as if you have loss of paint in an artwork done 20 years ago. Because if it's contemporary, you are not expecting that it's beginning to lose material. Now, with contemporary art, that's something that some advisors never mention, I think some of them don't even know, that contemporary art is a big problem from a conservation point of view, because many schools have put a lot of focus on the concept and on the idea of the artist creating, which is totally valid, but if you as a collector are buying something, you have to know that if they are using any material, which is what they are doing these days, they may take paint that is created for the walls and they put it on canvas without priming the canvas. Or they use rubbish they find on the street and glue it on a piece of panel and then put a bit of paint on top of it. Looks great, the story behind might be amazing, but I would not pay much for that because very likely that will not last a lot. When we have artworks from hundreds of years ago that were done following a methodology, that they are still with us today. So conservation in contemporary paintings is a big issue. Of course, the provenance is the history of the paintings, history of ownership, so if it was in the hands of a royal family or someone recognized as a top collector or these days a celebrity, that takes the value up. And then historical importance, size, that's an objective. So you have something, same artist, same style, same years, same series, and one is bigger than the other, the bigger will be more expensive. Unless it's so big, then it's not so expensive, because if it's too big and doesn't fit in a normal house, then it's more difficult to place. It can only go to a museum or a very large house. So size up to a point. Subject matter, and I'm going to show you a few examples. Medium is not the same if you have oil on canvas as if you have pencil on paper. Quality and the market trends. But I'm going to show you some of these with examples. So now is where I want to hear your opinion of these two paintings. Okay, they're quite similar, vast. You can see they are slightly different time, but which one you think is more expensive? Maybe you recognize, when I put the name of the artist, that will be an easy answer. But which one you think, who thinks this is more expensive? Okay, who thinks this is more expensive? Okay, now I'm going to show you who is this. This is Renoir. Now, if you knew it was a Renoir, you probably have put the hands up, okay? But I agree with you, I personally like that much better. I think this is a very weak Renoir and a very boring subject, but it's a Renoir. This is Louis Valtat, not so well known. So that was all, look, it's a big difference. So here, the big difference in price is mainly the name, the artist, okay? Subject, here we have two Botticellis. They were sold both at Sotheby's with 1 year apart. This is the one I showed you before, so you know the price. And this is also a Botticelli. I mean, the photo, really they are comparable, same size, on panel, they're very similar. Really, you are quite comparable. Okay, show you. 92 million, you knew that? 45 million. What makes the difference here? Okay, I'm already giving you a clue, subject, okay? Why this is almost half. There were a few other factors, but the most important factor is the subject. This is a religious, very religious painting, and not even a Madonna with a child, which is kind of easy to live with. This is very charged, very dramatic, very Christian. So this is something that could be collected by anyone in the world. It's a young man, very attractive by a very well-recognized artist. Here, I mean, if someone is not Christian, maybe it's not easy to live with that artwork. So in this case, anything that is religious, and in Old Master there are many, usually the same artists these days, those overly religious, other than Virgin and Child, usually anything that is so dramatic, or Christ on the cross, the value is lower than other artworks. Okay, I don't know if you can see this. These are worlds. These are really from the same series. They're called the Reigning Queens. This is Queen Margaret of Denmark, and this is Queen Elizabeth II. Do you think they have the same price or not? Which one is more expensive? Yeah, nothing. Queen Elizabeth II. Why? Because it's more iconic, yeah? It's more recognized. And also, even from the point of view of political, Queen Elizabeth II was like more important than Queen Margaret II, but here is more the iconic image. So that was sold for 400,000, and it's quite a big difference, yeah? I mean, so it's not just a little bit. There are other factors always, and I'm not looking at every single factor. But when you make comparables, that's what I'm looking for. Another one, Canaletto. Two iconic views, San Marco and Gran Canale. Okay, you all in your mind have decided which one is more expensive? San Marco and Gran Canal. So it's half. I mean, here I wouldn't be surprised if Gran Canal was 8 million, okay? But it's almost half. Again, it's not just location, but it's certainly big. So let me give you, here is, I'm just already giving you the prices to see how the different materials work. So they are all soups. Here we have graphite and calcine on canvas, so it's not oil, but it's on canvas, more traditional. They are always the most expensive worlds. Second ones are screen prints. So being a screen print, there is more than what, there are several screen prints of it. That's why it's slightly, and that's why I have 247 out of 50, okay? So there was a series of 250, this is the 247. And then graphite on paper is much less. Usually works on paper are cheaper than on canvas. And now, up to you. These are exactly the same. The photos are taken from different places, so that may look different. Don't look at the photos, they are just the same. The only difference is tomato or green pea. Which one is more expensive? Tomato, yeah, you got it. So more iconic, same as we're doing, okay? Color. Color also can influence. This is Lucio Fontana, Argentinian Italian artist. Argentinians like to say he's an Argentinian artist. He was born in Argentina, but he did most of his in Italy. Italians consider him an Italian. But other than that, these are from the famous series Concetto Spaziale, which is these cats, okay? And here, color, and there is, so in Fontana there are two things that take the value. Color, and the Concetto Spaziale, sorry, the color and the number of cats. Oh, sorry. So this was 4 million, and it was that even didn't get 1 million. So Fontana's top values, red and white, and the more cats, the more expensive. So if this was red, it probably would be maybe 2 million. But, so that's, just to tell you, and I've been showing you very objective factors. So imagine putting all that together plus the many subjectives. So tastes change. So we more or less know what is the taste of today. Difficult to predict what's going to be the taste in 1 year or even 2. This is a Renoir. This is Renoir's wife with Renoir's son. So it's a very iconic image, very typical Renoir. Impressionist was the most collected categories in the 80s and was reaching really high prices. And this was from the Snubble collection, When they bought it in 1988, at the height of the Impressionist collecting, and Renoir was a top artist, demand artist at the time, they bought it for 8.8 million, and they sold it in 2020 for 2.4 million. And we are talking Renoir, and we know the provenance, and the condition was good. Here is really the taste of the moment. Call it also fashion if you want. So that's to say things, art can go up, but can also go down very even for big names. Market mood or fashion, this is what is called ultra contemporary, which is mean artists under 45-year-old. In 2021 and 22, there was a big bubble for emerging artists. And in fact, here we have this painting. Was estimated at 25 to 35, which I think was a right estimate for this very young artist, still not that validated, known through the gallery circle, but really was not in museums. It was really up and coming. And then it sold for 189. That's really, I mean, speculation. And in fact, the next year, the market started going down. It was already, the auction house knew it was going down, so they estimated already 9 to 15. And even so, it sold only for 11. So in 1 year, this is a big, and they're not that different, honestly. Medium. Same artist, very similar artwork. Marble is always more expensive than terracotta. So you have marble, then you have maybe bronze, and then terracotta is usually the cheapest. Here are two Picassos. Picasso, I mean, is one of the most prolific artists. And again, it changed a lot which you have it. When you have in ceramics, he did many, and their value is much, much lower than canvas, and in particular, iconic canvas. This is from, I think it's Dora Maar, is the 1930s, is the period that now is more requested by collectors. But that could change, because as I said, for example, Renoir or the Impressionists, Monet, in the 1990s, every top collector, what they really wanted was an early Monet. These days, Monet is still a very much in demand artist, but what is on demand is the late period of Monet, in particular the Nymphes. So things really change even for established artists. Provenance is very important. These are two Rothkos from the sale in the same year, 2007. The image here, you might tell me this is more, the colors are more vibrant, so okay, but from 72 to 22 is a big, big difference. Here, the big difference is that that was from the David Rockefeller collection. So not only a very established name, but he was also a top collector. And Sotheby very cleverly took this picture of him in their marketing campaign. This is more recent from the sales in November. This is Gustav Klimt. And I put here you three comparables. This is the painting that was sold for a record price to 36. Remember what I showed you at the beginning? So after the Leonardo da Vinci, this is the most expensive artwork sold at auction. In private hands, there are things being sold higher price, but at auction. And the image is not very good, but these two are comparables in this, you have the same figure, but the background for this is very plain. It's not really complete. On top of that, the sitter here is the daughter of the main patron of Klimt. And Klimt had painted the portrait, and when she went to see how it was, she didn't like it and asked to do more work on it. So it's an iconic painting, it has a lot of history. It is somehow more comparable to this when you put in a price, because even if it's not a full-size figure, the structure and the complexity and the colors of this is more comparable with that. In fact, the price is, okay, is half of it, but still. The big difference here is also that it was sold at Sotheby's 2 weeks ago as part of the collection of Leonard Loder, who passed away. So again, top collector. Loder had donated a wonderful collection of Cubist art to the Metropolitan Museum that will be open soon, to many other museums. He was the chairman of the board of the Whitney Museum. He started as a member of the board, going all the way up to chair for many years, and The Whitney Museum, their original building in New York, was in Madison Avenue at the Breuer Building. Then it was too small for them. Long story short, they did the big Renzo Piano building near the Meatpacking. And that building was then rented to the Metropolitan Museum, who exhibited their modern and contemporary collection for a while, and then also rented to the Frick collection while they were doing some renovation in their main building. Now Sotheby's has bought that building, and they just opened it 2 weeks ago with this auction. So you have an iconic building by an iconic architect that has been a space for 3 museums, and then you have the Loder connection as chairman of the board and his collection. So there were many things together that were helping that sale. There was a lot of momentum. The sale went pretty well. That doesn't mean that the market has completely recovered. When you have good, fresh material on the market, usually the market responds. And it could be that we are starting like a recovery, but in that case was more like what was on offer there. It was an iconic collection. Okay, provenance, Jackie Kennedy. This is not art, but this is one of the things auction houses also sell. When Jackie Kennedy passed away, there was a sale at Sotheby's at the end of 1990s, and anything that she had at home, there was really not like a big collection. You could have a little ashtray, all the little photograph frames, anything. One of the things was this pearl necklace that you've seen probably this photo many times, okay? So, and it were fake pearls, not even real pearls. You could buy at the time of the auction the same on Madison Avenue for $70. It was estimated by the auction specialists on $700 because they knew the connection with Jackie Kennedy. So 10 times more. You know how much it sold for? That's crazy. So basically they were not buying the necklace, they were buying the connection with Kennedy. So this is just to explain really provenance, how can provenance change value. This is the Salvator Mundi that I mentioned before. So this is before restoration. It was bought by 2 dealers and a small auction house in New Orleans for $1,175. After restoration, studies, it was exhibited in a Leonardo exhibition at the National Gallery in London, so museum validation, and they did a big research on, you cannot read it from here, provenance. Basically, they were trying to trace it almost up to Leonardo being in 2 royal collections. You can find that online. If you are curious, go into Google, you will find it on the Sotheby's website. And this is during restoration, so that's why I'm missing. There was so much missing, and basically the face was completely repainted, and this is after restoration. And now I'm almost getting to the end. Do you remember that? You may not. The banana sold at first 120, then sold a second time, and a third time. This is conceptual art. So basically, Catalan is this Italian artist that is always very ironic, and in fact, it was kind of, this was a conceptual art, he was trying to get people to think about the value of art. In fact, it was a critique of the high values that certain contemporary art was reaching, even at Art Basel, because that was on the top gallery, Perrotin at Art Basel. And well, it went viral, and then last year, it was offered at an auction in New York for a price, the estimate was $1 million, and it went all the way to $6 million. And it's not the banana itself, yeah? So whoever has bought that will just get, what they really get is a certificate saying they are the owners. And if they want to display, they should have a banana and the gray tape. In the case of Sotheby's sale, they offer the buyer a complete the tape, but they can change it. If it gets brown, they have to change it. It has to be hung at a certain level, 120 centimeters from the floor. It has to be on a white wall in a certain angle. So that's what you get as the owner of a conceptual of this piece of conceptual art. That price is crazy, yeah? So this year, so they estimated 1 to 1.5 and sold for 6 million. This year, they tried to replicate. Maybe you have read about this. So same artist. Here is a solid gold toilet, and again, is criticizing and satirizing wealth, power, luxury. Sotheby's put it in the new building. I went and visited, and you could go in there. You were not allowed to touch it or sit into it this time. However, this toilet has a long story, because there was another one. It was a series of 3, although in fact he only created 2. The first one belonged to the Guggenheim Museum in New York, and it was exhibited in 2016. It was placed at one of the restrooms at the top of the Guggenheim. If you've been to the Guggenheim, you remember. People were queuing because they were allowed to use it. And there were thousands of people going and queuing to use it. Okay, so 2016, that same one belonging to the Guggenheim, that was loaned to a retrospective of the artist in the UK. Blenheim Palace is a palace outside London. Is also the family of Blenheim Palace. Churchill was part of that family, so it's very iconic. And these days, they organize these shows of contemporary art. They had installed it in one of the bathrooms, and the night before the preview, it was stolen. It has never been recovered. Everyone thinks it's been sold for its weight, because it's 10 kilos of solid gold. Okay, so that one is gone. So we go back to the one offered by Sotheby's, and they decided it's very difficult to put a price for that, the same as the banana. What price do you put for that? There is really no other record. So they decide to go for the weight. The weight is 10 kilos, and they say we will start the bidding at whatever the gold is worth that day. So they started the bidding at 10 million because it was like 9.98 something. In this case, it didn't sell for much, much more. It sold on the first bid, hammer 10 million, with commissions 12. Here you go. This is the same sale as the Klim, but here we are selling, you see, toilet. Sold at $10 million, then the buyer paid 12.1. Remember, I was telling the commission. But the funny thing here is we know the buyer. And the buyer is Ripley's Believe It or Not. So believe it or not, that's what it is. So maybe it will be, I'm sure it will be at one point at one of the Ripleys. I don't know where. But just, so basically, I hope you got a bit of the idea how to put value, or maybe not, because it's really complicated. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer. Sure.
Based on all the factors you discussed, what do you think is driving the value on that rabbit that sold for $91 million?
Is the artist.
Okay.
And Jeff Koons is on one hand already in important collections, contemporary collections, some museums, and the gallery behind Jeff Koons is a very powerful gallery. It's Gagosian, which is, didn't have time to go and talk about galleries today, but it's really the pinnacle. So they have already a brand in the sense that people that have the money and want to buy something is not just the brand of the artist and the artwork itself, but they know that if they have a gallery behind, that gallery will help the career of the artist and will support the artist and will not let them go down. When the big galleries, they go to auctions, and if things by the artists they represent are not being sold, they will buy them because they don't want that the public value of it go down. So and the galleries at that level also have a portfolio of clients, and very important clients. So all that together.
I have a question.
Sure.
So like when you get a board of trustees for a museum, most of those people are the 1%ers who have art collections. Is there an ethical thing with the manipulation of the art market with that? Yes,
I mean, that's the thing. There should be an ethical, and most of the boards like that. It's true that museums, to be in the board of a museum, in most of cases, The selection is not people that know about the market of the artworks, but it's people that have the funds to give to the museums, whether it's in artworks or cash, because what the museums do. And it's true that some of those members may not have the right ethics to be there. I think many of them really believe in art, are collectors, and do a great work because museums need that, otherwise many of them will have to close. But it's true that some of them may take advantage of it. So museums these days are also being very careful where is the money coming from those board members. In the case of the Whitney, there was this issue, I cannot remember the name of the board member, but he was related to the arms industry. So these days, museums don't accept board members that are related to some industries like arms or oil and gas. But it's also very tricky just to say, I'm not taking anyone from oil and gas, like the BP sponsorship of the British Museum, because museums need to get the fund from somewhere. So I think it should be look on the detail, not just say a blanket, we don't take oil and gas. What is that a specific company or a specific person, how is involved, what is behind? But yes, that's a difficult line, because you really have to make sure that one thing don't goes on top of the other. But yes, but basically museums, that's the issue, where the money coming from? And there's not an easy answer. And also in some museums, particularly contemporary art, some of those members are collectors themselves. And also it gives advantages to the museums because they might buy for them or they buy with a promise of a gift. But at the same time, those board members also get a lot of insight for being there. So they know that an exhibition of a certain artist is coming at that museum or another museum. Because as you know, an exhibition has to be organized at least 3 to 5 years before. And the museum will start asking for artworks for that exhibition. So these board members learn about an exhibition of Picasso or Koons or Mark Bradford or whoever 3 or 4 years in advance. So if they find a good opportunity at the market, usually in particular for certain artists, usually the prices grow up to the exhibition, because after the exhibition there is going to be more demand. So if you know 5 years in advance that there's going to be that exhibition, so that's kind of some sort of internal information that they get. So it's an advantage. But so, I mean, it's very difficult to put a clear line between what's right and what's not. There is a gray area there. But museums will not be able, many museums will close without the support of board members. So they also do really very good and important job, and they donate, many of them, a lot of money, resources, and time.
I have a question. From that particular art that you said that the restoration actually decreased the value of because it was too restored. What determines that? What wasn't left?
Oh, you mean the Salvator Mundi? No, the Salvator Mundi was a different story. I mean, the Salvator Mundi, the thing is, it was sold as a painting by Leonardo da Vinci. But probably there is only like a 25 or 30% of Leonardo's actual paint on there, because through more than 500 years, a lot of the original paint has been lost, and it has gone through many restorations. But in the case of Leonardo, because the name is so important, and there is no other Leonardo in private hands, that's the other thing. All the Leonardos are in museums, so you really want the Leonardo, that was the only option. And so Christie's marketing campaign was the last Leonardo. It's the last one in private hands. And it made sense if really it was destined for the Louvre Abu Dhabi, because it's a new museum. Creating a new museum today, unless you're filling it with contemporary art, is very difficult to fill it with masterpieces, because masterpieces for all masters or even up to 19th century paintings, the good ones are already mostly in museums. So in that case, the name overpower the conservation. But in general, for not so well artworks, conservation is a big factor. Yeah. Okay. Just behind you. Yeah.
So I was interested about the role of banks and not banking in the art world. Do they operate different?
Our bank,
Art banking.
I mean, what are banking? Wealth management these days for top collectors, they look at their wealth, and some people have collections that may be, but our bank, I'm not sure what question you mean. Our funds, is that what you mean?
Because in some of Italian banks, I know that they opened new branches about art, probably also insurance. So I was interested if they...
Give me an example who Mediobanca, I mean, they are not opening that. What they are creating is art funds, or they are opening an exhibition of their own collection. Some bank has their own collection. There are many banks that are also sponsored for exhibition. But I think what you mean is art financing. Is that what you mean? Loans based on artworks, is that what you mean? Instead of, I go for a mortgage and I have this other house, instead of giving my house for the mortgage, I put a painting as a collateral. Is that what you're asking about?
Probably, but also I thought that there were branches that were helping people or investors into investing in art.
Yeah, I think, I mean, but so there is one thing is art loans, which is loans given based on an artwork. And there you have auction houses do that and they normally give between 40 and 50% of the low estimate of the artwork. And if it's an auction house and then the person doesn't repay back, they can always sell at auction. Then you have boutique investment boutique lenders that give financing of an artwork. And then you have banks giving also loans. In the case of the banks, they normally do it for those people that are already clients of the bank. And the loan, although it's based on the specific artwork, it's usually covered by all the assets of that client. However, it's a very fascinating aspect, but we could have like a couple of hours just on that. Was that the answer? Yes. Okay. And is it, in the United States, they are beginning in Italy, but legislation in Europe is much more complicated. In the United States, art loan is the most developed one is here. Bank of America has a huge portfolio of art lending, but also many other banks. And you had,
No.
it's okay? Okay, yes.
I was wondering, like, how the relationship, like, if it's a live-in artist, how it works. Like, is it like the auction house, like, reaches out to an artist and they're like...
No, auction houses deal on the secondary market.
Okay.
So if an artist goes to an auction house, and when I started at the auction house, I was at the beginning, the first year was called the valuations counter, and that was before internet. That's how old I am. So people will come with the actual paintings and the furniture and the little, and they say, and there were some artists coming with their portfolio. Auction houses, they have in a few instances, but for very specific reasons, they don't sell directly from the artist. They resell from the gallery or a private collector. So an artist that doesn't already have a record of sales, the auction house will not accept it and will never accept it directly from the artist itself. Yeah. Okay. Well, there are no other questions. I hope this is taking you. Please go and visit the many. Well, you have a lot of museums in Miami, and they are all worth visiting. Maybe leave the museums for next week, when all of us have disappeared and clogged the streets. But the fairs, definitely, make an effort to go at least to one of them. Well, thank you.
Thank you.